What is going on, Ive Warriors? So today is a special day because we are going to talk about a new study, brand new study that just dropped, and is talking about intermittent fasting not being any different or having any benefit over just normal caloric restriction. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. All right, guys. So we have the study up here. I want to go through the study quickly with you. I've already read the study a few times and took my notes, but I want to talk about this. Now, I'm not saying, because there's so much black and white that goes on in the fitness community. There's so much team here versus team here. And it's like, well, if you want, or if you think that intermittent fasting is the way to go, then you don't believe in caloric restriction. And if you believe that caloric restriction is the only thing that matters, then you don't believe in intermittent fasting. That is not what we do here. Intermittent fasting is a very beneficial tool, but it has to be in conjunction with caloric restriction because you still cannot change the laws of thermodynamics. That's 100% true. But let's look at this study. And the devil is always in the detail, especially in studies like this one, because the abstract will tell you something, but once you look at the detail of everything, then you start to realize there is differences that I see here. Not to mention, there have been studies, meta-analysis, systematic reviews, which are with randomized controlled designs just like this, that are more powerful in terms of the volume of information and synthesizing that data. So this is calorie restriction with or without time restricted eating in weight loss. And it was run by Dr. Daying Lui and and colleagues. And this is what they break down. And they surmise through the results, through the conclusion, among patients with obesity, let's go ahead and fill that out here. Among patients with obesity, a regimen of time-restricted eating was not more beneficial with regards to reduction in body weight, body fat, or metabolic risk factors than daily caloric restriction. Funded by the National Key Research and Development Project. Now, I am also not one of those people. I'm always going to go science first. I'm not one of those people that look at who's funding it, who's this, who's that, and trying to attack the funding and stuff like that. First of all, the people that funded this, none of them are from the pharmaceutical industry or the dairy industry or any of that stuff. They're not from any of that. It's literally funded by Key Research Development Project and all these different people, a lot of different other universities, all simply to get the information, to get what's the difference. The cool thing about this is that it's randomized. So all of the researchers who were testing and getting the data, they did not know which participants, because it was also blind, they did not know which participants were doing intermittent fasting or not. They just took the data down. They didn't know who was doing it and who wasn't doing it, right? So let's go ahead, get down into it, nitty gritty. They've explained it. They said that it's not different, but the truth is that it's not, that it is similar. Not that it isn't different, it's similar. It isn't statistically significant, but let's look at the data itself. Let's actually look at the data. First, we look at the table here. We can see time restricted eating, daily caloric restriction. You see it on top here, you see it on top here. It has 69 people in this variable, 70 people in this variable. Keep in mind, there were a certain amount, but there was like a 20% drop off. So these are the people that completed the entire 12 months. And that's what makes this study cool, that it looked at a snapshot of a year. They did a 6-month increment, a 6-month increment where they tested everything, all of the data for the 6 months, and then they came back and for the remaining 6 months for a total of 12 months, right? So these are their numbers. Pretty even. Let's see here. age, pretty close. Body weights, pretty close. A little bit higher in the time restricted feeding. This is before. This is their baseline data. So this means before they started the project, or before they started the study or the intervention. Body mass, pretty similar. Very close. Very close. Body fat mass, very, very close. Body lean mass, higher in the time restricted feeding group, higher for them, lower with the daily calorie restriction group. Body fat percentage, pretty similar. Abdominal fat area, very similar. Visceral fats, lower in the time restricted feeding group, higher in the daily caloric restriction. Subcutaneous fat, higher, and lower in the daily caloric restriction group. Now, I don't want to bog you down with so much of this, but I wanted you guys to see that, because those things matter too. The more you have, the easier it is to lose. So that is an important aspect. But this is what I want to show you guys. Now, granted, it's not statistically significant. We understand it's not on of a p-value of 0.05. I believe the p-value is 0.11. So it's not statistically significant when you put all of this together. But it is interesting to see that in almost every single occasion, looking at the collective data, the time-restricted feeding group still lost more kilograms than the daily caloric restriction group. Now, it's not statistically significant, but they still lost more. For example, body weight kilograms, right? And this is the important thing about looking at the 6 month and looking at the 12 months. I'll break that down. But body weight kilograms, 6 months, it was negative 9.4. For the daily calorie restriction group, it was negative 8.9. That is the total. That is the average, the total average loss, and the total average loss for the time restricted feeding. The 12 months, it was 8.0. So that's the total 12 months data. It was even less for the daily caloric restriction. It was just 6.3, creating a difference of 1.8, right? Creating a difference in between the two of 1.8. So now we have a 0.5 difference for the first 6 months and a 1.8 difference. What is this showing you? That if you were to create a regression line, right, going straight up, it looks like the gap is the gap is spreading between how much weight the intermittent fasting group is losing as compared to just the caloric restriction group. That is an interesting thing. Now, what happens if we look at the next 6 months? Are they still losing at a faster rate? Let's look at the other stuff. Body mass index, so the BMI, reduction of 3.4, negative 3.4 kilograms. Not that different from negative 3.2, but it's still less, right? It's still less. I mean, it's still more of a loss or a reduction in BMI. 2.9, negative 2.9 with the total 12 months, and then negative 2.3. Not that big of a difference, but once again, we see that there is a growth, a gap that's emerging between the intermittent fasting group and the caloric restriction group. See, they're not going to tell you this because the difference between these two is so small that they're similar. But this is also telling an overall story. No, if you were to diet for 1 year, maybe this is not that big of a deal. If you stick to intermittent fasting for the rest of your life, you get 5 years in or 7 years in or 8 years in, who's to say that this gap doesn't continue to grow? Now let's go into the other thing, waist circumference. So your waist, when measured, the waist circumference in centimeters, a negative 9.4 result for intermittent fasting, and then a negative 8.7 for daily caloric restriction. So just on the 6 months, intermittent fasting, once again, reduces more, even though it's not statistically significant, still very similar. But then we look at 12 months, negative 8.8, but then negative 7.0 for the daily caloric restriction group. The gap has widened again, negative 1.8. So What happens in year 2? What happens in year 3? Depending on your longevity with the diet, you could have much better results than somebody who's just sticking to the caloric restriction on its own. Body fat mass in kilograms, same thing. 6.9, negative 6.9, negative 6.4, with a 0.5 difference. Then negative 5.9, negative 4.5, with a, oh no, it's gonna reset. With a, all right, hold on, let's see if I can get this back. Expired. Hold on. No, I think I already have a subscription with the New England Journal in Medicine, so it should be good. I don't know why it has a time limit like that though. It's so annoying. All right, let's kill this and bring this up, right? So body fat mass with 5.9, so negative 1.5, so an even larger gap. Notice how the gap continues to increase. The distance continues to be much wider when it gets longer. So one of the things that's crazy about intermittent fasting that people say, hey, look, you can't do intermittent fasting because we don't know what happens in the long term. We only know what happens in the short term. And it's really good in the short term, but look at the long term, right? And this is 12 months. This is a randomized controlled trial of over 139 individuals. This is good data. And what it's showing us is that the gap just continues to increase. If there was a regression formula, a regression line, we will be seeing a steeper decrease for and a pull away effect with intermittent fasting. Body lean mass. Now this is your muscle. You don't want to reduce this. You don't want to reduce this. Look at how minimal the changes are. Granted, remember, the intermittent fasting group had more lean mass by a small amount, but still, it's not that big of a difference in terms of the two, as compared to all of these, how aggressive all of these are with the difference of this. For example, negative 0.5 and then negative 1.5, or negative 0.7, then negative 1.8, while this is negative 0.2, which is really small, not even 1, and then negative 0.3. So it's just it's very small compared to the differences that you're seeing when the body fat is reducing. Body fat percentage, we got 4.7, not that big of a difference, just a 0.3, but still, it's still showing this consistency of time restricted feeding reducing more. Then 4.3, and then 3.0, negative 3.0. So now it's even 1.3, negative 1.3. Look at the difference. Look how much it's grown, how much they're pulling away from just caloric restriction, right? Then we have the abdominal visceral fat, right? The visceral fat. We got 32.9, negative 32.9 as compared to negative 31.3. And we all know that intermittent fasting helps a lot with visceral fat reduction, right? Because it's the brown fat, it tends to be the brown fat, and intermittent fasting has an ability to activate those brown fats very aggressively. So negative 1.7 difference, but then look, negative 26 to negative 21 kilograms, which has a difference of negative 4.9. Look how strong that is. And then area of abdominal subcutaneous fat. So that's the fat right, subcutaneous means right under the epidermis, right under the skin. And abdominal means the stomach region. That's what that means. 6 months, negative 70.1 kilograms on average, as compared to negative 49.2. Negative 49.2 kilograms lost by the daily caloric restriction group, with a whopping negative 20.9. A whopping negative 20.9 difference between the two. Negative 53.2 to negative 37. Now, this is the interesting thing. I guess so much was lost here, way more than everywhere else. There was a slowdown effect that took place. But still, there's a big gap between the two. This is the only one that doesn't exponentially grow. Looks like it's closing in, but abdominal fat is one of the hardest fats to reduce, especially subcutaneous, considering the beta adipocytes, the beta fat cells, and the alpha fat cells, with a lot of, normally biology-wise, a lot of male and females have high percentage of adipocytes, fat cells, in the stomach that are beta fat cells, and those are the hardest ones to release the fatty acids and reduce your overall abdominal fat. So of course you're gonna see differences like this, but look at the whopping difference. They don't talk about that because overall you put all the data together, it's not that big of a deal. But you separate the abdominal subcutaneous fat in centimeters, you see a big difference, right? So there's exponential growth in almost all of these factors, almost across the board, but they don't mention that. And then let me see. I think we look here, even in the triglycerides and stuff. You see, look at the triglycerides right here. Look at the 13.1. Look at that. 25.19, negative 5.9. There's differences where the time-restricted feeding group is losing way more in certain instances like this. Even when you look at insulin disposition index, negative 4.6 as compared to negative 3.3. Negative in 12 months, negative 6.7, a reduction with an actual increase in the daily caloric restriction group, with a difference between the two of negative 7.3. So my point is, always look at the details, right? Always look at the details, because that's important to understand what's the actual differences with the numbers, right? Because that could still tell a story. That could still tell a story of the exponential separation between those who are doing time-restricted feeding versus those who are doing just daily caloric restriction. Now, also, I do want to mention that they made the group, the intermittent fasting group, which is the intervention group, they made them stick to a time frame of from 8 in the morning to 4 p.m. But the caloric restriction group, they didn't have any time structure at all. And I don't agree with that. They should still have some type of time structure where they can spread it out, because they could inadvertently do some days where they're fasting, some days where they're not, some days where they're getting like time restricted feeding type fasting times. You know, they could get 15 hours of a fast, or 16 hours. You never know, because they didn't have a time when they needed to start and when they needed to stop. And sometimes people just stop eating at certain times throughout the day and just start eating at certain times throughout the day. So they might not start at 8 o'clock, they might start later, and then they might end at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, and then they end up still fasting for 16 hours. So that was up in the air, but at least we know that the 8 to 4 was guaranteed. They were doing time restricted feeding. They used a lot of data points. They were taking pictures of their foods before they ate it, after they ate it. We're writing in daily logs. Every twice a week, they were being seen by the researchers, and they did a lot of stuff to try to control for adherence, and it was really strong stuff. But my point is, just look at the details. Now, the next video that I'm going to do that will come out on Wednesday, I'm going to show you guys a study that is actually a meta-analysis, which meta-analysis are much more powerful than just single studies. Meta-analysis looks at multiple studies. This meta-analysis that I'm talking about took over 1,200 different studies that had multiple people included in that study, and looked at randomized controlled trials involving intermittent fasting, and showed that intermittent fasting carried a benefit. Now, granted, it did not do 1 year. It didn't do 1 year, but it did do 6 months and stuff like that. But we're gonna look at that in the next video, because the breadth of information and data that was synthesized makes it very powerful, and still competes very well with this, because this is just a single individual study. But I wanted you guys to see that, so you guys understand that there is nuance to it. You have to look deeper into the study. Don't just go by the CNN headlines or the whatever, Fox headlines or any headlines. Don't go by any headlines, because they're going to tell you what the abstract concludes, but you're not going to see the actual numbers. Hopefully this video has helped you guys. Of course, Patrons will be down in the down in the comment section below. And if you guys want to, the Lumen, which is a device that I am sponsored with, that I 100% love, I'll have the link down there. The Fledge Fitness 50 will still give you $50 off of that. It's a device that if you breathe into it, it tells you if you're burning fat or if you're burning carbs. And the cool thing about that is that it could tell you if you're over fasting for yourself. If you go to sleep in a fast and you wake up and you breathe into it, and all of a sudden you see, that you're burning carbs, that means that glucose neogenesis could be happening, where your body's breaking down muscle tissue to provide you with energy, turning the muscle tissue into glucose. And that's not good. There's always outliers. You want to make sure that for yourself, you're fasting in a good space. You don't want to be doing 24 hours of fasting when your body is only adapt or effective at 16 hours or at 20 hours. So go ahead, click that link, take a look at it. It's called Lumen. It's a respiratory exchange ratio device in your hand. The only one of its kind, doesn't exist anywhere else other than in labs. You'll absolutely love it. It will help you 100%. You can check out my videos on it. All right, guys, until the next one, peace out.